The snow was falling sideways when they dragged her out of the church. 3 men. Gloved hands. Faces red from whiskey and righteousness. They didn't bother with her boots. They didn't bother with her coat. They shoved her barefoot into a drift that swallowed her to the knees, and the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her with a sound like a coffin lid dropping. Inside, the organ kept playing. Like nothing had happened. Like a woman hadn't just been thrown out to die. Her name was Eloine Hart. 23 years old. Widow of 6 months. And according to the good people of Bitter Hollow, Colorado, she was a murderer, even though no trial had ever been held, no evidence ever shown, no judge ever consulted. A whisper was enough in a town like this. A whisper, and a wealthy father-in-law who wanted her gone. She fell to her knees in the snow. The wind cut through her thin black morning dress like a butcher's knife. She tried to scream, but the cold stole her breath before it reached her throat. And that's when she saw him. A shape on the ridge above town. Tall. Broad as a door. A man made of fur and shadow, with a rifle slung across his back and 2 wolves sitting at his heels like they belonged to him. He was watching. He had been watching the whole time. Now tell me, if you saw a woman dying in the snow thrown away by her own people, would you ride down that hill? Or would you turn your horse around and pretend you never saw her? Because what this mountain man did next, no one in Bitter Hollow ever forgot. His name was Cashin Vale, though nobody in the valley had spoken it in 9 years. They called him other things. The ghost of Red Pine. The mountain devil. The man who came down once a year to trade pelts for coffee and salt, and who never looked anyone in the eye long enough to be remembered properly. He was 6'4", bearded to the chest, dressed in bear hide and wolf fur, and he lived alone in a cabin 10 miles above the timberline where no sane man would winter. He hadn't meant to be in Bitter Hollow that day. He'd come down for lamp oil and a new whetstone, nothing more. His 2 gray wolves, Ash and Ember, hen-raised from pups after their mother died in a trap, padded silently beside him as he cut through the pines above the church. That's when he heard the shouting. He stopped. Ash's ears pinned flat. Ember let out a low rumble that wasn't quite a growl. Cashin crouched behind a boulder and watched the scene unfold below. The church doors banging open. The men hauling the small figure in black. The way they shoved her, not pushed, shoved, the way a man throws trash into a ditch. And then the doors closing, and the figure crumpling into the snow like a dropped flower. He waited. He told himself to wait. It wasn't his business. Townsfolk killed each other over nothing in these parts. A card game, a stolen horse, a wife's roaming eye. He'd learned 9 years ago that stepping into other people's storms only got a man wet. But she didn't get up. Minute passed. 2. 3. The snow kept falling, piling on her shoulders, her hair. She was shaking so hard he could see it from 100 yards away, and then, worst of all, she stopped shaking. That was the sign. When the shivering stopped, death was about 10 minutes behind. Cashin swore under his breath. A single word, rough and reluctant. Damn. He rose. Ash and Ember rose with him. He didn't run. Running was a fool's move in deep snow, but he moved down the ridge with the long, sliding stride of a man who'd spent a decade learning how mountains killed people and how to not be killed by them. His rifle stayed slum. He didn't need it. Not yet. She heard him before she saw him. The crunch of boots, heavy and steady. She tried to lift her head and couldn't. Her eyelashes had frozen together. Her lips were the color of old bruises. Then the wind changed, and she smelled him, pine smoke, leather, something animal and warm, and she felt a great shadow fall over her like a roof. Cashin knelt. He didn't speak. He pulled off his enormous bear-hide coat, the one worth more than most men's houses, cured and sewn by his own hands, and he wrapped it around her shoulders in one motion. The weight of it nearly pushed her flat. It smelled of wood smoke and pine sap and something she hadn't smelled in 6 months, safety. He lifted her like she weighed nothing. One arm under her knees, one behind her back. Her head lolled against his shoulder. She tried to speak and only a whisper came out. Why? He looked down at her. Gray eyes, sharp as flint, set in a weathered face. Because nobody else did. He turned, and that's when the church doors opened again. Pastor Jedediah Hart, her father-in-law, the man who'd orchestrated this whole murder dressed up as justice, stepped onto the stoop in his black frock coat. A cigar in his mouth and triumph in his eyes. Behind him stood Sheriff Corey Blackwood, a man whose badge had been bought and paid for, and four of the town's deacons, which was just a polite word for the Hart family's hired guns. Jedediah's smile faltered when he saw the mountain man holding his daughter-in-law. Stranger, he called, voice oily and loud. That woman is a murderer. Put her down. Cashin didn't put her down. He looked at Jedediah Hart for a long, cold second. Then he looked at the four gunmen. Then he looked at the sheriff. And then, in a voice that was not loud but carried across the whole square like a gunshot through ice, he said one word. Mine! The sheriff's hand moved toward his pistol. Ember began to growl. One word. 5 letters. In Bitter Hollow, that was a declaration of war. The men on the stoop froze. In the West, mine meant something specific. It meant claim, protection, ownership under the old law of the frontier. Where a man who spoke that word over a woman was announcing that any bullet meant for her would have to go through him first. It was the oldest, ugliest, most honest vow a frontiersman could make. No preacher required. No paper required. Just a man, a woman, and the willingness to die for the claim. Jedediah Hart's cigar fell out of his mouth. You don't know what she is, he spat, recovering. She poisoned my boy. My son. She fed him arsenic for 3 weeks until his heart gave out, and then she tried to cash his bank draft the next morning. The whole town knows it. Cashin's gray eyes didn't move. The whole town says it. That's not the same thing. Sheriff, Jedediah snapped. Arrest him. Sheriff Blackwood hesitated. He was a coward in a badge, and cowards read the weather. He saw the 2 wolves. Lord, were those wolves? Crouched low in the snow, eyes locked on his throat. He saw the Sharp's rifle slung across the stranger's back, a rifle that could punch a hole through a grizzly at 300 yards. And he saw the stranger's hands, calm, steady, one cradling the woman, one resting loose and ready near the big bone-handled knife at his hip. Pastor, the sheriff said carefully, maybe we ought to arrest him. The 4 gunmen started forward. Boots crunching. Hands drifting to holsters. Cashin shifted Eloin gently to his left arm. His right hand moved, not fast, not showy, just moved, and suddenly there was a cold dragoon in it, hammer already back, bore aimed at the dead center of Jedediah Hart's chest. Everyone stopped. First man to clear leather, Cashin said quietly. I shoot the pastor. Second man, I shoot the sheriff. Third and fourth, the wolves get. You want to do the math, or you want to go back inside and finish your hymns? Nobody moved. Not even the wind seemed to move. Eloin, barely conscious, felt his heartbeat against her cheek. It was slow. Steady. The heart of a man who had done this before and was not afraid to do it again. Jedediah Hart's face went the color of old paper. You'll hang for this, he whispered. You hear me? I'll send riders to every town from here to Denver. Every bounty hunter in the territory will be hunting you by spring. Good, Cashin said. I like knowing who's coming. He began to back away, step by careful step, keeping the dragoon trained on Jedediah. Ash and Ember backed with him, fangs bared, eyes never leaving the gunman. When he reached the tree-line at the edge of the square, he holstered the pistol, turned, and vanished into the falling snow like he had never been there at all. The church doors closed again. But this time, nobody was playing the organ. Eloin drifted in and out. She remembered the rocking motion of a horse, a big one, a mountain horse, shaggy and sure-footed. She remembered the smell of the coat wrapped around her. She remembered a voice murmuring to the wolves, low and rhythmic, almost like a song. She remembered pain, the terrible pain of thawing, of blood returning to fingers and toes that had nearly died. She cried out once, and a hand, huge and rough, touched her forehead. "Easy," he said. "Easy now. The cold's leaving you. Hurts worse going than coming. Breathe through it." She opened her eyes to firelight. The cabin was small. One room. Pine walls black with decades of smoke. A stone hearth the size of a grave, burning with logs thick as a man's thigh. Bundled herbs hanging from the rafters. A workbench covered in pelts in various stages of curing. A rifle above the door. A single bed, his bed, where she was now lying under 3 heavy wool blankets. He was sitting by the fire on a low stool, working oil into a leather strap. The 2 wolves lay at his feet like dogs, though no dog ever had eyes that yellow. When she stirred, his head lifted. "You've been out 2 days," he said. 2. Fever. Frostbite on 3 toes. I think I saved them all. You were thin before the storm. That's the only reason I caught you in time. Fat people die faster in the cold. Takes less to freeze a bird than a bear. She almost laughed. It came out as a cough. He rose, brought her a tin cup of something hot. Broth. Deer meat, wild onion, something bitter she didn't recognize. She drank it in small sips. He watched her the whole time, not unkindly, but carefully, like a man watching a trapped animal to see whether it would bite. "My name is Cashin Vale," he said when she was done. "This cabin is mine. No one knows where it is except 2 men both dead. You are safe here until spring, or until I decide different. Do you understand?" She nodded. "No," he said, sitting back down. "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth, because if you lie to me I'll know. And I'll put you on a horse and point it at the next town and wash my hands of you." Her heart climbed into her throat. "Ask." He leaned forward. Firelight caught in his beard. "Did you kill your husband?" Eloin closed her eyes. For a long moment she didn't answer, and Cashin let her not answer. He was a patient man. The mountains teach you patience, or they kill you. He sipped his own broth and waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin as cobweb. "No," she said. "I didn't kill him. But I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to so many nights I lost count." Cashin said nothing. Just listened. "I married Silas Hart when I was 19. She began. "My father owed the Hart family money. A lot of money. Pastor Jedediah came to our house one Sunday after service and said the debt could be forgiven, all of it, if I became his son's wife. My father agreed before I'd finished pouring the tea." She swallowed. Silas was 32. Handsome, in the way a snake is handsome. He had a smile that never touched his eyes. On our wedding night he beat me with a belt because I didn't say his name right. He said I'd learn. And I did learn. I learned to keep my head down. I learned to walk on the sides of my feet so the boards wouldn't creak when he was drunk. I learned 40 different ways to explain bruises to the women at the general store. Cashin's knuckles had gone white around the tin cup. "For years," she whispered. "For years of that." And then one morning in June he came home drunk from Denver, madder than I'd ever seen him, said he'd lost $10,000 of Hart money at a poker table. He took a horsewhip off the wall and told me tonight I was going to learn what pain really was. She stopped. Her hands trembled around the blanket. He came at me in the kitchen. I had been canning peaches. There was a paring knife on the counter. I didn't mean, I only meant to keep him off me. He came forward and the knife went in, just below his collarbone. He looked so surprised, Cashin. Like he'd never imagined I could be anything but a thing to him. He fell. He got up. He called me names and stumbled out into the yard. He got on his horse and rode for the doctor, and he almost made it. He died in the doctor's parlor of blood loss, an hour later. She opened her eyes. They were full of tears, but her voice was steady now. I didn't poison him. I never touched arsenic in my life. But Jedediah needed a story the town would believe, because the truth, that his son was a drunk and a brute, and his wife cut him in self-defense, would have shamed the Hart name. So he invented poison. He paid the doctor to swear to it. He paid the sheriff to arrest me, then paid him to let the church handle it instead. That's how I ended up in the snow. She laughed bitterly. A trial would have let me speak. So they skipped the trial. Cashin was quiet a long time. Then he said, Your father-in-law killed his own son's reputation to protect his own. That's a particular kind of evil. Yes. And he'd kill you to keep the story clean. Yes. Then come spring, Cashin said, he's going to come looking. She nodded. He stood, walked to the fire, threw another log on. Sparks flew up the chimney like fireflies. All right, he said, not turning around. All right, you stay. And all right, when he comes, we'll be ready. The snows closed the past 3 days later. 20 feet deep in places. No horse could come up that trail until April at the earliest. For 4 months, Eloan Hart and Cashin Vale were alone on the mountain with 2 wolves and the silence. At first she slept most of the day. Her body was starving, her mind half broken. He fed her like feeding a sick fawn, small meals, often venison broth and pine needle tea and the flat sweet cakes he made from ground acorns and honey. He gave her his bed and slept on the floor by the fire with the wolves. He did not touch her. He did not even come near her unless she asked. And slowly, day by day, color came back to her face. She began to help. She mended his shirts, which had been mended so many times the original cloth was a rumor. She cooked when he was out checking trap lines. She learned the names of the herbs hanging from the rafters: yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, bloodroot for infection, wild mint for the endless tin cups of tea they drank. And she learned him. She learned that he had been a cavalry captain once, in a war he would not name. She learned that he had a scar across his back shaped like a cross, and another at his temple shaped like a star. She learned that he sang in Gaelic to the wolves when he thought no one was listening. She learned that his mother had been a Scottish midwife and his father a Crow trapper, and that both were long dead. She learned that when he laughed, which was almost never, his whole face changed, and for a half-second he looked like the young man he must have been before whatever broke him in the war. And she learned, somewhere around the 4th week, that she was not afraid of him. Which was a thing she had not been able to say about a man in 7 years. But down in the valley, Jedediah Hart was not idle. He was writing letters. A lot of letters. And one of them reached a man named Rourke Devereaux, in Santa Fe, who had killed 11 men for money and would kill a 12th for the right price. Spring came late that year. The first thaw crept up the mountain in mid-April, turning the snow to gray slush, then to black mud, then to the first thin green shoots along the creek banks. Eloan stood outside the cabin one morning with her hands wrapped around a tin cup, watching the ice break up in the stream, and realized with a jolt that she had been happy for an entire week without noticing. She also realized she was in love with him. It was not a dramatic love. It had crept up on her the way spring had, a little more light every day, a little more warmth, until suddenly the world was different, and she couldn't remember the cold. She loved the way he moved through the trees without sound. She loved the way he spoke to the wolves, one hand on Ash's shoulder, like they were his brothers. She loved the cross-shaped scar on his back, and the way he flinched, still, in his sleep sometimes, and the way he had never once in 4 months raised his voice at her. She loved him, and she was terrified, because Cashin Vale was a man who had built his whole life around being alone, and she did not know how to tell him what she felt without driving him away. So she didn't tell him. Not yet. Instead, one morning over breakfast, she said quietly, "He's coming, isn't he?" "Soon." Cashin was skinning a rabbit at the workbench. He didn't look up. Yes. How do you know? Ash went to the South Ridge yesterday and came back with his hackles up. Wasn't a bear. Bears he ignores. Wasn't a cougar. Cougars he'd chase. Men. 2, maybe 3. Still 2-3 days out. Her stomach turned over. Hired guns? Almost certainly. Your father-in-law wouldn't dirty his own boots. She set her cup down. Cashin, you don't have to, stop. He looked up at last. His gray eyes were steady. I told a man on a church stoop in December that you were mine. I don't unsay things like that. If he wants you, he comes through me. If he comes through me, he comes through the wolves. If he comes through the wolves, God help him, because I stopped being God-fearing a long time ago. She was crying. She hadn't meant to be. Why? She whispered. Why did you say that word? You didn't even know me. He set the knife down. He came around the workbench, slowly, and for the first time in 4 months he sat beside her at the little pine table. Close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. 9 years ago, he said, I had a wife. She went very still. Her name was Mara. We lived in a place called Two Creeks, down in New Mexico. I was a captain, home on leave. I'd been gone 3 months. A gang came through the valley while I was riding back. The Dowd brothers, you won't know them, they're all dead now, and they took what they wanted and they left what they didn't. When I got home, Mara was in the yard. She'd been there 2 days. The crows had found her. Eloin reached for his hand. He let her take it. I spent the next year hunting them. I found all 6. I did things to the last 2 I will not repeat in front of a lady, or anyone ever. And when it was done, I rode up this mountain and I told God if he wanted me he could come and get me himself. Because I was finished with valleys and finished with towns and finished with people. He looked at her. And then I came down for a whetstone, and I saw 3 men throw a girl into the snow while the organ played, and I stood on that ridge and I thought, if I turn around now, if I let this one die the way Mara died, then those Dowd boys won in the end. Then everything I did after Mara was for nothing. Then I'm just another man on another mountain, letting the world burn because he's tired. He squeezed her hand. Gentle. Enormous. I said mine because somebody had to. Because 9 years ago nobody said it for Mara, and she froze in a yard alone, and I've lived with that silence every day since. I wasn't going to live with it twice. Eloin leaned her forehead against his shoulder. He smelled of pine smoke and rabbit fur and iron. She did not speak. There were no words big enough. Outside, Ash lifted his head from the porch and stared south. A low, soft whine slid out of his throat. Cashin looked up. His jaw tightened. They're closer than I thought. They spent the next day preparing. Cashin walked the perimeter of the cabin with a length of knotted cord, measuring sight lines. He dug 3 shallow pits along the south trail and drove sharpened pine stakes into them, then covered them with brush and new fallen leaves. He showed Eloin how to load his second rifle, an old Henry repeater, and made her practice until she could do it blind. If it goes bad, he said, you take the back door. There's a crack in the cliff behind the woodshed. You squeeze through it, and you follow the creek down. 2 days walking gets you to a Shoshone camp where an old woman named Hewwoody owes me a life. Show her this. He pressed a small bone carving, a wolf's head, no bigger than his thumb, into her palm. She'll get you over the border into Wyoming. I'm not leaving you. You'll do what I say. Cashin, Eloin. His voice was not sharp, but it was final. I have buried 1 woman in the dirt. I will not bury another. If it goes bad, you run. Promise me. She closed her fist around the wolf's head. I promise. She lied. That night, Ash and Ember refused to come inside. They paced the porch, noses to the wind, ears forward. Cashin sat in the rocking chair with his sharps across his knees and did not sleep. Eloin lay in bed listening to her own heart. She could hear, far off, the call of a horned owl, and then, a moment later, an answering call, too regular, too precisely timed. A bird did not answer another bird with that kind of rhythm. Men were signaling each other in the dark. She slipped out of bed and padded to the main room. "Cashin," she whispered. "I heard them," he said without turning. "4 of them. Spread wide. They're coming up the slope in a crescent. Good men. Expensive men. What do we do?" He finally looked at her. His gray eyes were almost silver in the moonlight coming through the shutters. "We let them come," he said, "and then we show them what the mountain does to men who don't belong on it." Rourke Devereux had killed 11 men, and he was proud of every one. He was a small, neat man, with black gloves and a black mustache waxed to points, and he wore 2 pearl-handled revolvers low on his hips like they were jewelry. He had been paid $2,000 in gold to bring Eloin Hart back to Bitter Hollow alive, and to bring the mountain man's head in a sack. The mountain man was extra. Jedediah Hart had offered 500 more just for that. Devereux had brought 3 men with him. A tracker named Pike, a knife fighter called Duquesne, and a quiet ex-soldier named Harlan Briggs who lost half his face in the war and grinned twice as wide with what was left. They had been climbing 3 days. The tracker had found the cabin at dusk. Now, in the blue hour before dawn, they moved through the pines in a loose arc, 40 yards apart, rifles up. The plan was simple. Pike would flush whatever was in the cabin out the front. Duquesne and Briggs would catch them in the open. Devereux would finish whoever was still standing. Pike reached the clearing first. He did not see the tripwire. The first stake pit took him in the shin and he screamed, one short, shocked scream, before ember came out of the dark like smoke with teeth and ended the scream in his throat. Duquesne fired at the sound. Muzzle flash lit up the trees. And Cashin Vale, prone on the ridge above the cabin, sent a .50 caliber Sharps bullet through Duquesne's forehead at 120 yards, in the dark, by sound alone. 2 down in 11 seconds. "Pike!" Devereux hissed. "Duquesne!" Silence. Just the wind. Harlan Briggs began to back up, slowly, toward the tree-line. He was a veteran. He knew the taste of an ambush. He had gotten perhaps 15 steps when Esh took him from behind, a gray blur, 90 pounds of muscle, jaws closing on the back of his neck. Briggs fell without a sound. 3 down. Rourke Devereux went very still. He was alone now, in the pines, before dawn, on a mountain that was eating his men. A lesser man would have run. Devereux was not a lesser man. He had killed 11. He had not done so by running. He slid behind a thick pine, drew both pearl-handled revolvers, and began to move, slow and silent, toward the cabin. He would take the woman. She was the ticket home. With a hostage, even a mountain devil had to talk. He reached the back of the cabin. The woodshed. The crack in the cliff. He saw, in the dimness, a small figure slipping through that crack, a woman in a gray shawl, clutching something in her fist. Devereux smiled under his waxed mustache. He stepped out and pressed the barrel of his revolver to the back of Eloin Hart's head. "Mrs. Hart," he said softly, "your father-in-law sends his regards." Eloin froze. "Drop whatever's in your hand." She opened her fingers. The bone wolf fell into the mud. "Now walk," Devereux said. "Nice and slow. Back to the front of the cabin. We're going to call your man out." Cashin, still on the ridge, saw them emerge into the dooryard. He saw the revolver at Eloin's temple. He saw Devereux's free hand cup his mouth. "Mountain man!" Devereux called, and his voice was amused, almost cheerful. "I have your woman! Throw down the rifle and come into the clearing, or I paint the snow with her." Cashin closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he stood up. He walked down the slope into the clearing with the Sharps held one-handed above his head. Ember appeared at his left, Ash at his right. He reached the flat ground 10 paces from Devereux and stopped. "Drop the rifle," Devereux said. Cashin dropped it. Now the pistol! Cashin unbuckled the dragoon and let it fall. And the knife? The bone-handled knife joined the rest. Devereaux's smile widened. Good. Now call off the dogs, or I start with her kneecaps. Cashin looked at Eloin. Her face was white. But her eyes were steady, and she was mouthing something, and he understood at once what she was mouthing. I'm sorry. Because she'd lied to him. She'd promised she would run, and she had tried, and she had been caught, and now she was going to get them both killed. He gave her the smallest shake of his head. Not your fault. Never your fault. Then he said quietly, Ash. Ember. Back. The wolves backed off 3 paces. Lay down. Eyes locked on Devereaux. Smart man, Devereaux said. Now kneel. Cashin knelt. Hands behind your head. Cashin put his hands behind his head. Devereaux kept the revolver at Eloin's temple and walked her, step by careful step, to within 6 feet of the kneeling mountain man. Close enough to see the gray in his beard. Close enough to aim. Your father-in-law wants him dead, Devereaux said conversationally to Eloin. But you wants alive. He's going to make sure you hang in front of the whole town. Public. Official. Clean. He cocked the hammer. Sorry, friend. Business. And in that half-second between the click of the hammer and the pull of the trigger, Eloin Hart did the last thing Rourke Devereaux expected. She bit him. She twisted her head and sank her teeth into the soft web between his thumb and forefinger, hard, down to the bone, the way a starving animal bites, and Devereaux screamed. And his gun hand jerked sideways, and the shot went wide into the pines. Cashin moved. He came off his knees like a mountain lion, one hand scooping up the bone-handled knife from the snow as he rose, and he was inside Devereaux's reach before the second shot could be fired. The knife went in just below the ribs and up. Devereaux's eyes went wide. The second revolver never came up. Cashin caught Eloin as Devereaux fell. For a long moment there was no sound in the clearing except their breathing. Then Ash and Ember began to howl, and it was a sound of victory and of mourning at once, the oldest song there is on any mountain. 4 men lay dead in the snow. And down in Bitter Hollow, Jedediah Hart did not yet know. But he would. They buried the 4 men in a single long trench at the bottom of the ravine, where the spring runoff would carry the smell away before bears could find it. Cashin did the digging. Eloin sat on a stump and watched, still shaking, and did not try to help, because he had told her, gently, that this was his work, the burying of men, and he had been doing it for a long time and would do it alone. When it was done, he washed in the creek. The water ran red and then pink and then clear. That night they sat by the fire and did not speak for a long time. Finally Eloin said, He'll send more. Yes. 10 men. 20. He has the money. Yes. Then it doesn't end, does it? Not up here. Not ever. Cashin stared into the flames. No, he said. Not up here. She understood what he meant before he said it. We go down. We go down, he agreed. We ended at the source. I have been hiding on this mountain for 9 years, Eloin. I told myself it was peace. It wasn't. It was a long, slow way of not being alive. And now there is a man in a valley who thinks he can buy my death and yours, and as long as he breathes, you will never sleep a full night again. It's murder, she whispered. No, he said. It's a reckoning. There's a difference. A murder is what he did to his son's name and to you. A reckoning is what's coming for him. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once. I want to be there. He almost argued. She saw him almost argue. Then he closed his mouth and nodded back. All right. They rode down out of the mountains 3 days later. Cashin on his big shaggy roan. Eloin on a sorrel mare he had traded a winter's worth of pelts for, years ago, and never ridden. The wolves followed at a trot, tireless. Cashin wore his bear hide coat. Eloin wore a deerskin dress he had sewn for her over the long winter, and a wide-brimmed hat, and under the hat her hair had been cut short, a new woman. Not the widow in black who had been thrown into the snow. She carried the Henry repeater across her saddle. She knew how to use it. They came into Bitter Hollow at dusk on a Sunday. The saloon was loud. The church was dark. Smoke curled from the chimneys of houses where families were eating supper, unaware. Cashin rode straight down the main street, slow, and the few townsfolk still out stopped and stared, because the whole town had heard the story, by now, of the ghost who'd carried off the widow Hart, and here he was, riding in plain daylight like he owned the road. A boy ran ahead to fetch the sheriff. By the time Cashin reined in at the church steps, Sheriff Blackwood was standing at the top of them, one hand on his pistol, his face gone the color of curdled milk. "Vale," he said. "You can't. Where's the pastor?" He's in the parsonage." "But you, Sheriff." Cashin swung down from the roan. Ash and Ember appeared at his heels like shadows. "You have a choice tonight. You can stand on those steps and try to stop what's coming, in which case I will put you in the ground beside Rourke Devereux. Or you can take off that badge, lay it on the top step, and walk away. Your wife will thank you. Your children will thank you. God, if he is feeling merciful, may even thank you." Sheriff Blackwood looked into Cashin's eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He unpinned the badge. He laid it on the step. He walked away, and he did not look back, and 3 weeks later his wife would tell people it was the first wise thing her husband had done in 20 years of marriage. Cashin climbed the steps. Eloin climbed them beside him. The wolves stayed at the bottom, watching the street. He knocked once on the parsonage door. Jedediah Hart opened it in his shirt sleeves, a glass of brandy in his hand. The glass fell. "You," he whispered. "Me," Cashin said. And Eloin stepped out from behind him into the lamplight. Jedediah Hart stumbled backward. His face did something terrible, went through rage, then fear, then a strange, awful grief, all in the space of a breath. He looked at Eloin and he saw, perhaps for the first time, that she was a person. And he looked at Cashin and saw his own death standing on his porch in a bear hide coat. "Please," he said. "Please. I have money. I can pay. I don't want your money," Cashin said. "Then what?" The pastor's voice cracked. "What do you want?" Cashin looked at Eloin. It was her answer. He would not take it from her. She stepped forward. She was not crying. Her hands were steady. "I want you to walk out onto the steps of your own church," she said, "and I want you to tell the town the truth. All of it. That your son beat me for 4 years. That I cut him in self-defense. That you invented the poison. That you paid the doctor, paid the sheriff, threw me in the snow to die. I want it in your own voice, in front of every person in this town. And I want you to sign a confession that goes to the territorial marshal in Denver in the morning. And if I do that?" Jedediah whispered. If I do that, you'll let me live?" "No," Eloin said softly. "You'll go to prison. You'll rot there. And every day of it, you'll remember that a woman you tried to murder let you live, when she had every right to do what you did not, and that will be worse than any bullet." She paused. "That's my reckoning. Take it, or take his." Jedediah Hart looked at the mountain man. Cashin had not drawn a weapon. He did not need to. His eyes were enough. The pastor walked out onto the church steps. The town was gathering now, summoned by whispers. 200 faces in the dusk. He spoke for 20 minutes. He left nothing out. At the end, he was weeping, not for his son, not for Eloin, but for himself, because he finally understood, after 63 years of a self-righteous life, that he had been the villain of his own story all along, and now the whole town was going to know it. The territorial marshal came 3 days later. Jedediah Hart was hanged in Denver the following spring, after a trial that made the front page in 4 states. Cash and Vale and Eloan Hart did not stay in Bitter Hollow. They rode out the next morning, before the town could decide whether to thank them or fear them. They crossed into Wyoming. They did not go back to the mountain. That cabin had been a tomb, Cashin said, and he was done living in tombs. They bought a small piece of land on a creek near a town called Willow Run, where nobody had ever heard of either of them, and they built a house with 2 rooms and a wide porch. And they planted apples. They were married by a circuit preacher under a cottonwood tree. Ash and Ember attended. Eloan wore blue, not black. They had a daughter 3 years later. They named her Mara. And sometimes, on cold nights when the snow came sideways across the plains, Eloan would sit by the fire and watch her husband and her daughter and the 2 old gray wolves sleeping on the rug. And she would think about the woman she had been, the widow in black, barefoot in the drift, dying while the organ played, and she would understand something that she had not understood that day. The men who threw her into the snow had not been her greatest enemy. Her greatest enemy had been the voice inside her that had whispered, for 4 long years of bruises, that she deserved it. That she was nothing. That no one would come. Someone had come. And in coming, he had not saved her. He had shown her that she had been worth saving all along. That was the difference. That was everything. The last word Cashin Vale ever spoke to Jedediah Hart on that church porch, the word he did not say aloud. But that Eloan read in his silence as the pastor broke, was the same word he had said on the first day, in the snow, in front of the whole town. Mine. Only this time, it did not mean I claim her. This time it meant she chose me back. And in the end, on any mountain, in any valley, in any life, that is the only claim that has ever mattered.